The big U. NCR, Eddie Encina. But Howard, you good? Can you hear me? Are you frozen?
Jay, I've got bad reception right now. I just want to tell you right
Oh
now.
boy, where are
We're gonna.
you?
I'm so. I was gonna try to do so. I'm with some families in town, so we're bringing them over to the Manatee Center over in Apollo Beach, and um, I was gonna do this outside, but the wind's too loud, so couldn't do that. So I'm in my car. We're gonna try and make this work.
You're a good man. All right, we won't keep you long, buddy. I wanted to open up and I know you've done a lot of great job, written a lot of great articles from the Tampa Bay Times. But one thing that I know you wrote recently was, the return of Gordon McDonough and what that could possibly open the door for. Could you speak about the kind of, I was just mentioning how a lack of ego and a lack of stubbornness for Julian Breesbaugh to be able to bring those guys back and maybe even to like admit he was wrong or just what that thought process is like for him. And then also, people are always going to wonder now, could that ever lead to a return of Steven Stamkos to Tampa?
Yeah, for sure. That's obviously the natural, question. I thought once it's one thing bringing back Ryan McDonough, it's another thing bringing back Yanni Gord. I mean, obviously those are needs that were filled at different times. But like you said, I mean, Julian Breesbaugh is on a 365-day-a-year mission to make this team better, and that doesn't stop at any point. And with McDonough, they obviously saw the opportunity there and they jumped on it. Even taking on all of his cap space and the cap that it involved. 2 years after, there was a situation where it was too much. And with Yanni Gord, I think that you're looking for a player who now is a little bit different in a player that he's actually learned a much bigger leadership role from being on an expansion team in Seattle, but still is the same kind of guy who, like you said, is a pest and just that Tasmanian devil kind of player who feasts on being around the net and causing havoc and crashing the net. Both him and Bjorkstrand are guys that do that, and I think we've seen that in the games that we've seen them there. So but again, it's very easy to kind of when a player leaves or you've got to move them or that's it. And I think what Julian has seen is the need. It's very clear that this team wasn't the same defensively after Ryan McDonough left. Right. So you bring him back, and now you're a better defensive team. With Yanni Gord, again, the kind of intangibles that he brings, that's something that this team definitely needs down the stretch and in the playoffs. So you do that. And I still do think that down the road, it might not be in a year, it might not be in 2 years, but at some point down the line, there is going to be a door that opens for Steven Stamkos eventually. And that
really
it'll be a situation. Yeah, I honestly do. I think Steven kind of thinks that too. And I don't know if they ever discussed, Julian and him ever discussed that down the road, but I just think that, that one, there will be a need for Steven Stamkos in the room again, and he might not wear a C, but his voice, the been there, done thatness of what everything that he's brought that one day, and even at 35, 36, he's still got a heck of a shot from that left circle. So I do think that down the road, if they, everything's got to work out a little bit in terms of, the money's obviously paramount, right? Right. How much can you get someone to take on of his salary, stuff like that. But, I still think that's, and maybe there's a romanticism to it in my own eyes, but I do think that, even from talking to Steven when he came down in earlier in the year, that there is some kind of notion of maybe he will be back, don't rule it out, I guess, and like I said, I don't think it's going to be, it's obviously not going to be today. It might not be tomorrow. It might not be this off season or next, but I think down the road that door will open for him. And, I'll say the other thing too is, there's a lot coming up with the salary cap in terms of, it's not no more of these nominal increases, and teams are going to be able to spend how they want to now, in order of the way that the cap is, I think it's going up 22 million, I think, over the next 4 years. So, that's a huge increase in comparison to what what it's been over the past 5 years. So, like I said, there might be a little bit of romanticism to that, but I do think there's a little bit of reality to it as well over the next couple of years.
The hopeless romantic, the big use, Eduardo Encina, everybody. Let them know. Yeah, I mean, that would be fantastic. That'd be great. I think back to, yeah, it was great that they won the back-to-back cups. But what if the salary cap was able to go up the last couple of years? Are you able to hold on? Are you able to just keep McDonough this whole time? Are you able to keep a Gord, keep a Killorn, right? Keep a Palat? Like, what kind of situation does that entail? I think this is a very tricky 3-game road trip, Ed, where you have to start on time for all 3 of these games, including this one against Dallas, because Dallas has that firepower where if you blink, it's 2 or 3 nothing, and it's just going to be a steady uphill climb against one of the best goalies in all of hockey, in Jake Ottinger. What are some of the things that you're keeping an eye on as they take on Dallas, as they take on Utah, and they take on Vegas in these next 3 contests?
Yeah, I think that, I kind of wrote about this a little bit today in the Times. It's just kind of, what they showed the other day against Philadelphia is something that was, on paper, a really good game. 2-1, 2-0 loss, 2-0 win, a shutout win. But Cooper said that they played pretty slow. That was one thing that they, you look at the game plan, the game as it played out. There was a lot of, we know that this team can get a little bit too methodical at times, and I think that was kind of the case. A lot of passing, a lot of slow development in their own end in terms of entries in the zone. So I think the Cooper knows that, the players know that, and they know that that's not going to win in Dallas. That's not going to win in Vegas. That's probably not going to win in Utah. So I think that's a really big focus is getting back to, if you can't get the entry, dump it in, rely on, your forecheck, and, chasing pucks, retrieving pucks. I know it sounds simple, but, when they've struggled with entries, that's kind of gotten them back to that basic game plan of all that's all based on the forecheck. So I think that's going to be something, you're going to need, like you said, you're going to need leads in those games. You're going to need situations where you're not really chasing games. And like I said, I think when you establish that forecheck, especially now that you have Gordon and Bjorkstrand, both of those guys are, you've seen that third line, whether, it's Nick Paul on it or not, that, those guys can hunt down pucks, they can retrieve shots. And, I think we've seen a lot from the defensemen in terms of not being necessarily hesitant to put those shots on net too. So with the notion that, it's not just going to be one and done. So I think that's a big thing going into this game and going into this series of 3 games. And it's different because you're not chasing, you're not playing against those teams in the Eastern Division, Eastern Conference that are, you're in the hunt, you see them in the standings along with you. These are teams that are, for Dallas, they kind of already know who they're playing in the postseason. And, you really just kind of want to, but at the same time, they're in a great spot right now, but you can't get complacent about it. You've got to keep hunting points because obviously there's teams behind you. So, but again, this is the last time too, where they leave the East Coast time zone. So I'm sure they're seeing it as one of these situations where, hey, let's get the points that we can right now and, finish this thing out, because after this, there's a lot of, teams on the schedule that, again, you're fighting for, jostling for standings and positioning with. So, but again, I think that it's interesting to see Cooper kind of be pretty open about that, just saying that they played slow in that Philly game, even though they won, and, getting back to kind of, quick, but really basic kind of hockey in terms of, establish themselves in the offensive end and staying there. And, not, the turnovers are one thing, but I think if you're playing that kind of pace and that kind of game, the 5-on-5 will kind of, work itself out.
Ed, what have you made from the guys that participated in the Four Nations? I said before, like, yeah, they've gotten days off, but even Coop, like when we spoke to him the other night, like he looks like he needs a little bit. It's almost like you need a vacation from your vacation kind of thing. I think those guys, they've been smart with it, but how have you been able, like, I don't know if I've noticed maybe a difference with Hedman. Obviously that one game was a little bit more the U.S.-Canada game, but what do you make of those guys and even Coop himself and how they've looked and how they've dealt with the Four Nations face-off?
Yeah. So, I think the Canada guys are probably a little bit different. Like I said, I think Coop was kind of riding on a little bit of a high, obviously, coming out of that. But yeah, then you hit kind of a wall, and he has given those guys days off, all five of them. And I think the one practice he gave those guys off, he gave himself a day off too. So he wasn't at least on the ice leading the team. So it affects everyone. I think that the one guys to really look at are kind of Hagel and Cirelli, because they play such a physical 200-foot game. And Cirelli has had such a great year in terms of improving, like just becoming a great two-way player. And we're talking about the goals and the points and everything like that, obviously there with him. And I've seen kind of a little bit of fatigue in his game a little bit. Hagel's got such a motor that, I think it's hit him too, but Brandon Hagel to me is just like, he's just got this extra level, and, this, I don't know, it's kind of a hunger that he has to his game that I never really see him tired, but, I think it's hit him too a little bit, and even Braden Point a little bit too, meaning it's so tough, going from the Four Nations and all the fatigue level, all the intensity, and then going into the season. So I do think it's had an effect on all those guys. I think that, it plays out in different ways, but again, like, this team is so good, and the organization is so good at really kind of knowing that, and giving these guys time off, and, maybe, or even, the group as a whole, you give them, maybe it's a little bit lighter practice where you're just kind of looking, maybe you're focusing more on film and looking at things. I do notice that when you watch them practice wise, when they left for Dallas, they had a pretty tough practice, but I think that one was one that, like, usually before they fly out, it's maybe 30, 45 minutes tops, but they went, close to a full hour yesterday. And, but I think that was more of a focus on getting back to the pace. Let's not play slow. Let's play with a certain kind of pace, because we're going to need it on this road trip. But I think otherwise they're so good at just like knowing when guys kind of need one of those reset practices that might be just kind of based in details versus, going. And so I think that's one thing that, it's no joke that, when everyone does these polls and everything like that the Lightning are near the top in terms of like coaching staff, how they handle their players, stuff like that.
It's things like this.
A lot of things right. A lot of the things that we see, a lot of things we don't see. But I think, that this is a good example. There's no doubt that if we see it and we're noticing it, that maybe these guys are hitting a wall or getting into, hitting a grind there, that they've seen it much, much earlier than us. So, and that they're aware of it, and they're doing so, a lot to do it. And then one thing that I do know that this team does is they're so good at managing their players' health. Like I said, it's something we do see sometimes. It's something that there's a lot behind the curtain. But like I said, there's no doubt that I think I've seen it, but I don't necessarily worry that it's going to affect them down the stretch, because, like you said, the organization is so good at monitoring that.
No doubt about it, man. What do you got right now there on TampaBay.com and Tampa Bay Times, buddy? You there? There you go. Tampa Bay Times. Yeah, go ahead. TampaBay.com, Tampa Bay Times. What do you got? Give us some of your stories that you got up.
Yeah, so we're going out to Utah tomorrow. So we'll talk to number 98. He's got. I gotta talk to him at practice tomorrow. So working on that for a story for next week for when Utah comes down here. So that'll be exciting. I haven't been to Utah really, in a while. To Salt Lake, I've only been there once. So that'll be cool, just seeing, new team, new arena, all that stuff. And then, one thing that we're kind of for the B column working on is just kind of, I asked Coop about, and he kind of said the same thing a lot, but I think you were in that session. We're basically about, what does it mean right now as you're in position to kind of decide your fate with right. Between winning the division and being in that second or third spot. It's what sucks about this is that we've got three great teams in the top of that division, and one of them is not going to make it out of the first round. So does that matter when you're fighting for these points? And it was his answer was pretty interesting. He was talking about how sometimes it's about the schedule that you can get, right? And obviously you probably get a different schedule when if you're playing Toronto than if you're playing Florida, and that's a league thing and stuff like that. So, but sometimes that matters. So just kind of a little bit talk about that, and just kind of looking forward into, what this what what matters, and kind of whether this schedule and this format and stuff like that really works, in the playoffs. Is it better 1 through 8? Is it better, when you have 2, 3? You obviously establish some of these division rivalries like we've seen with Toronto and Florida, but in the long scheme of things, is that the right way to do it in the playoffs? So
it'd be nice to play some
we'll
other
talk about
teams.
that a little bit. Say it again, Jay.
It'd be nice to play some other teams, right, in that first round.
Yeah, as good as that rivalry is, as good as for the league and the state and everything like that, maybe it is, maybe it would be nice to play again, because we talk about Dallas. I think Dallas. We talk about Dallas, and I think Dallas is locked into Colorado right now. And so imagine a Western Conference where either one of those teams is a great team, and there's no doubt both of those teams are Stanley Cup contenders, but one of them isn't going to make it out of the first round. And the same thing about the Atlantic Division with those 3 teams between, Florida, the Lightning, and Toronto. So, it's kind of a little bit of discussion about that and what Coop has thought about it. So, yeah, that's what we got going on for our Sunday Beat column too.
Eddie in the Yard on Twitter/X. I said it earlier with Joey Knight, and I'll say it here with Ed. It's so important to support local, man. Please, Tampa Bay Times, get that subscription today. Every little bit helps. You may not think it makes a difference, but it certainly does. Get it as a gift for a friend. It's important, man. Supporting local. We need to prop up our local journalists here in the Tampa Bay area. So please do what you can and support the Tampa Bay Times today. Ed, enjoy your weekend. Safe trip out to Utah, my friend, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, pal.
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it, man.
Throwing up the ones, my man.